Do you think I can fix America?
I think, you have a shot.
Okay, that's encouraging. Hello, my name is Hannah, and welcome to I Can Fix America. This is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Sylvia.
And we are going to be talking about young people, like me.
Not like me.
Basically, we're providing you a thorough guide for how to achieve socio-political utopia. So, she's judging me, for the record. She thinks I should have prepared more.
Yeah. It's true. Less note reading and more note knowing.
So maybe we start with who we are, and then we can go into the rest. In case you haven't noticed, I am young.
I am not.
And why do we know each other?
We are related. It's my daughter.
This is my mother. Yeah, so I'm 18 years old, and as a child of the Trump era, I have been following politics basically since the age of 10. And I was basically very heavily involved with youth activist circles for a good chunk of my life. And I made a lot of observations, and I feel that because of that, I am at least somewhat qualified to assess the whole young person situation in this country. Also, I'm chronically online, as my mother will attest. I am the spokesperson for the young people.
I'm not sure about that, but you are a spokesperson for young people.
Okay,
so.
Please take it away. I need a break.
All right. I'm Sylvia, and just like Hannah, I follow politics. Have been following politics for a long time. I am originally from Germany and then moved to the United States in 2002. So I've been here for a while now. I'm an American citizen. And I'm also a historian, so these topics are very interesting to me anyway. And when Hannah asked me after this latest election what I thought about the idea of, doing a podcast, I thought that was a good idea because I like talking to young people, including my daughter, and if it has to be filmed and put online so that potentially 5 people might see it, I'm good with that.
Also, I am here to make enemies.
I'm not here to make enemies, by the way. I want to be left in peace. So we get started?
Okay. You guys remember the 2024 election? Me too. It was like a week ago. I want to try to figure out what happened. I certainly want to understand why young people kind of shifted more towards Trump. And
we can say his name,
Do we?
Aren't
Dare
you
we to?
The Harry Potter generation?
Oh no. We do not speak.
Okay, yeah. The formerly supportive of the author of Harry Potter. Not anymore, I agree.
We're just tackling controversy after controversy. Okay, so kind of our podcast format is going to be, we're going to start each podcast, not with this. This is a one-time thing.
We can only hope.
Hey! We're going to start it by asking a very serious, definitely not rage bait question. Then we're going to talk about the different facts and analyze it from different angles and the different components. And then we're going to at the end answer the rage bait question individually with a nuanced and thoughtful declaration of how we alone know how to fix America. And then destroy our opponent's arguments in a very reasonable and direct manner until one of us emerges victorious.
So much for not making enemies.
So, do you want to read the question for this podcast? Do you remember
Sure,
it?
I do. The question for this podcast that Hannah asked is the question, would Gen Z have voted for Hitler? Someone I know a little bit about. That's one area of my historical research.
For me, the question sort of came up because I was like, not to say that Trump is literally Hitler. That's a disclaimer I'd like to make.
And I especially would like to make that disclaimer because, full disclosure, I do not support Trump. I do not think that Trump is comparable to Hitler, and I don't think much of the comparisons that he is like the Nazis or a Nazi. I think we are far, far away from that. So Maybe not as far as we
knock on
hope.
wood. I don't have any wood to knock on, but in my mind I am knocking on wood. Despite me not literally thinking Trump is Hitler, I do want to use this question as a way to touch on this this very real phenomenon of increasing support for the growing global right by young people, and part of that is the fact that in this election there were definitely more young people voting for Trump, or less young people voting for the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers were 56% of young men, so this is the age group 18 till 30, they voted for Trump, and 40% of young women as well, as compared to 33% in 2020, so that's quite an increase.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because, like, there's been a rather long precedent for young people being sort of reliably Democratic voters. Like, since 2008, Democrats always got more than 60% of young people voting for them. 60% of the young people who voted at all were voting for them. That did not happen in 2024. I think Kamala Harris got like 54%, which is still the majority, but it's kind of alarming that she did even worse than Biden, who, you know, she kind of presented herself as this kind of young, more energetic alternative for Biden, and that it's still, she experienced such a noticeable drop with young people.
Yeah.
Is
so I guess the memes didn't quite do it. Maybe there's something else. Maybe the memes are already old generation. Or are they still, would you say memes is still the way to kind of win over young people's minds and hearts?
I think, you know, the memes are nice. Like, I don't know. But I also think what's even nicer is a strong economy. Like, I do think politicians underestimate the fact that young people are feeling very much the impact of the problems with the economy right now since COVID. And you can actually see that in the memes. Like, I can't tell you how many TikToks and Instagram reels I've seen where people are like, you know, that moment when you spend like you spend a lot of money on a degree and then you can't get any jobs for that anywhere.
Yeah.
Or like how it's impossible to find housing.
Well, that's the thing, you know, because memes or TikTok reels or Instagram reels, they are just a medium, right? I mean, it very much depends what is on these things and the content. It would be interesting to actually take a closer look at the content that the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party had to target young people. I mean, I read that on TikTok, Trump was able to gain so many more followers than Kamala Harris was, which surprised me. But so obviously they might have done something right, you know, the way they messaged and reached out to young people, because I think TikTok is a predominantly young generation medium.
Yeah, I guess what I do think is the like TikToks and stuff I saw from the Democrats, to me, I always felt, I mean, whenever you see older people use these internet things, there's very often this sense of, okay, they don't really get it, and so there's already this disconnect there, like, do these people even get me? And I think the way that someone like Trump overcame that, and this is something that I could talk about for a while because it makes me so angry, is, you know, he actually went on podcasts, which are mediums, I think, where it's a lot easier for older generations to still come across as genuine and authentic and empathetic than these TikToks, which are mostly, it's a lot of, you know, jokes. And I'm sorry, but when I think about, I don't like the guy, but when I think about who is objectively makes people laugh more, like, intentionally, look between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, I mean, that's certainly his, I think he has a bit of a better chance of that, just also because of his background as the celebrity.
I think you bring up a really good point here, not just, how he comes across then in these various formats. I think it's more about going there, right? Yeah. So the fact that he went there in the first place is probably something that already won him some points with some young people, and maybe the Democrats were still or are still too much focused on the old ways to communicate and to deliver news and to show their authenticity, because I think Trump was certainly not more authentic than any of the other political candidates, but it's actually just going there and being present, to me, seems already such an important step that was missed by the other side.
I mean, I don't know. I agree with you on the fact that him just going there is a big deal. I disagree with you on the authenticity side. I think Trump as a person, maybe, I don't know if he's really being authentic, but he certainly comes across as a lot more authentic because he's just less polished. He doesn't sound like a politician. Yeah. You don't feel like, no, he really doesn't, but you don't feel like every one of his words has been put through, like, has been examined by, like, a consulting agency, and, like, I think, young people, especially because we didn't grow up on this very traditional type of celebrity where, they're all like news media training and they're supposed to be kind of distanced. We grew up with influencers who, basically
parasocial
relationships where you feel like you know them and you want to know them and you want.
And it's actually not a bad thing if somebody misspeaks or is kind of almost in sweatpants, or or doesn't pronounce
That's
exactly.
That's when we need more sweatpants in Congress.
No, I'm just saying. I meant more.
No, I get what
the newscasters and things. That doesn't have to be so elitist. Shall we use that word?
Yeah, I think certainly there's an issue with this elitist aspect in the Democratic Party. Which is kind of ironic because they're supposed to be, the party of the working class, but
yeah, and they still are.
They certain policy-wise, they completely are, but vibes-wise, to use the
And I mean, they have, gotten much more popular, and they're based in college-educated voters, and so there has been a somewhat of a demographic shift in terms of the people who support them, but in terms of, like you said, the issues, that actually doesn't help much to explain why Trump got elected. When you really look at the economic plans, or shall we say concepts of a plan.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, I know this has been said like a million times before, but I mean, her being incumbent, or sort of, she's the vice president, I mean, that certainly also didn't help, so he had that advantage going for him, where people just, they were unhappy with how things were, and they wanted a change. But to me, I guess, what I still wonder about there is, why is it that this right-wing version of change is more appealing than, say, the Bernie Sanders version of change? And I would say right away, I don't think it necessarily is. I just think mainstream Democrats are a lot more set on keeping that side of the party, like, out of the limelight. And I think the Republicans have come to the point where they're really embracing this, like, populist rhetoric, this, drain the swamp type
I mean, that's
idea.
But apart from that also, I mean, I think that's the crucial question, right? What do we have in terms of explanations for why young people, especially young men, it has to be said, voted so in a large majority? I mean, 56% of young men. That's not a narrow majority. That's a pretty big majority. Why did they vote for Trump, and why did it also increase among young women? And I think what you said, I agree with you. The economic issue is important, and that's what I heard in a lot of interviews, and when you ask people, that the economy was number one priority, and it's switched dramatically from 2 years ago. The number one, according to polls, was abortion, of course, and I wrote down that number because it was such a dramatic drop. Let me see if I can
44%
find it. 44 to 13%. Yeah, I mean, in terms of
exit polls
saying, what is your number one issue, and I guess what I thought about this was, I guess in a way, is that Trump's strategy and Trump's communication about we just gave it back to the states, is that kind of working out, that many young people just said, well, you know what, I'm not against abortion, but I think we'll take care of that on the state level, and so they were willing to kind of throw their young fellows in the deep red states under the bus. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when you were in these activist circles, I know you focused more on climate change and the threat of that, but was that ever an issue, abortion? I mean, did people talk about that, or was that just a given?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the movements I was a part of, they were really into this whole intersectional idea that you can't just have climate action, you also need climate justice. So that means all these disadvantaged groups, it's all kind of connected, like fighting racial injustice, fighting for gender equality.
Right.
That basically their whole thing was, in order to stop climate change, you need to overhaul the whole system and the systems, these very systems that created these, not only these environmental catastrophes, but also this history of injustice. I think then with what I guess I would say is, with abortion, we didn't really talk about it, but what we did, because it was, at least the circles I were in, they were so focused on almost this revolutionary idea that, you can't, it doesn't make sense to fight within the system because it's too screwed up already.
Focused on the utopia.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that actually makes me think of something I've seen a lot of people I still know from these circles post, which really annoyed me, was these people who are like, well, abortion rights are gone now. I hope the extra 10 cents on your saving on your eggs was worth it, or something like that. And that to me is just so condescending. Your abortion, hope being able to feed your family was worth it. It shows that a lot of these people.
It shows, to use an overused word, their privilege, right? I mean, if you can make fun of someone, that comes to your mind by saying, oh, great, now those 10 cents that you have to pay less now, kind of betraying yourself as someone who never ever had to worry about a dollar more or less. And that's a problem. I think you're absolutely right. And it is condescending, and it also shows a complete cut off from the reality of this country, right? This idea that everyone, or almost everyone, has enough money to not have to worry about that. And that's not true. There is some real poverty in this country as well.
I also just I think that's another element than just people who are genuinely worried about being able to send their kids to college, be able to keep their job. They can't sit there thinking about revolution. They have to think about, how do I make it through from day to day, year to year? How do I keep my paycheck? So I think this ability to be the only solution to this is a complete overhaul of everything. That's something that's always going to be very long term.
Yeah.
That's something where
and I mean, that is also something that, sure, when you join certain movements, that might be on the top of everyone's list, but to assume that is the majority of young people would be wrong as well, right? I mean, most young people, I think, do not have an interest in overthrowing the American system. I would doubt that. If you look at 100% of all young people.
You bring together the people, the people who are extreme on both sides? You don't think that makes up a significant portion of people who are just that angry at America?
I mean, I think it makes up a significant portion of people. I don't think it's anything close to 50%. Not at all. I think, the extremes are probably, if at all, I would venture, I guess, maybe 10 to 15%, and that I think that's
on each side.
I'm just completely completely fantasizing it. I'm meaning I have no idea about actual numbers, but I would doubt that they would be much higher. I'm talking about violent revolution and really taking up arms to decide. I don't think so. I don't think so.
I mean, personally, not my idea of a good Tuesday. But I did want to, we've been sort of going through a few things, but I thought there were some questions I did want to go through more specifically. Starting with, because you're a historian, why are young people considered more progressive, and is there a certain historical precedent for that? I have my theory, but I'd like to know what you think there.
Well, as a blank statement that young people are more progressive per se, I would urge caution. I think it is true that young people are more likely, as a rule, to be open for, let's say, radical ideas from all different kinds of corners and sides. I do not think that, because progressive right now in the American discourse is very much associated with the political left, right? And while I do think that many of the, the social movements of the past century or so, young people were very present and were sometimes at the forefront. I mean, for example, the 68 generation, the 68 revolution comes to mind. So the 68 revolution was just this global phenomenon where young people started to question the system from, largely from the political left. There were also some things going on from the right, but it was really the left that kind of took off with that movement. So think about, the kind of emerged out of the anti-Vietnam protest and the anti-establishment protests. Then a little later, the anti-nuclear. So there was, in Germany, it was very much driven by a questioning of the older generation that had been responsible for, supporting Nazism and had not done enough to prevent or stop the Holocaust. So there was this questioning of these old elites, and it took various forms in various countries, but it really was like a red thread throughout the globe, and that was certainly youth dominated, without a doubt. However, even back then, it is important to know that there were also many young people who did not participate in these movements. And I think sometimes we forget that, that you feel like, we are close to 100% youth engagement back then. That was not the case. There were also, young people who felt, drawn to conservatism, or who didn't want to have anything to do with that, or young soldiers, who were not in favor of these movements. So that's why, in general, when you look at the young generation, I always find it a bit too much when people, because it reminds me of that idea that we also kind of talked about in preparation for this podcast, that young people are the solution to everything, right? They are the ones who are gonna come, they're gonna look at this mess that we older generations have created, and they're gonna fix it, right?
Kamala Harris telling us in the concession speech, "You are the future. Don't give up. Fix this."
And why is this true in a very literal sense, right? I mean, it's true that a young person is more of the future than someone like me, because hopefully, if everything goes right, that young person will be alive at least another 50 years after I die. So that makes perfect sense to me, right? So in a very literal meaning of the word, that is true, or of that saying. But What is not true is that young people necessarily, I think at least, have the better ideas, or are more likely to find the right answers. No, I don't think so. Even you.
Even me.
Well, maybe you are the exception.
Okay. No.
So, but
yeah. I mean, that makes sense. That was one thing I did write down with the movements in the 60s, that I feel like that, to me, when I think about young people being progressive, that's what I kind of always have in my head.
Yeah.
There's, the Vietnam protesters,
but
the
and that's so interesting, because, as you know, I'm currently doing research about the European New Right, and they have their origins around the same time. So they had their version of that. It just didn't take off, right? It was not the right moment for them.
Was that
We're
as
seeing
many young people though?
Well, yeah, I don't think so that they were strong in numbers, because, as I said, it just didn't take off. But they had a few, committed ones, shall we say, and they started writing down their ideas and their pamphlets and everything, but it didn't take off. It didn't have an impact, and we're seeing that now, though, right? Because the global right that you mentioned earlier, that is, there are some older people involved, obviously, but the thinkers, when you look behind, some of them are quite young, especially of the extreme right. So it also depends, I guess, on the historical circumstances, right? I'm sorry, I think I talk too much.
No, but I mean, because I thought of the 60s right away, I was thinking also, I wonder if that idea of young people being more progressive was as prevalent before that. I don't know. But that was one thing I was thinking about. And then also I was just thinking, like, on a psychological level, when I think about young people being considered more progressive, I think young people are less set in their ways just because they haven't experienced the ways for as long. So, like, tradition, which is very much for me associated with conservatism, maybe not so much the right, the global right that we're seeing right now, but, some form of the right, the conservative right, it does make sense to me that that isn't as appealing to young people, because it's more tradition, and young people are more likely, I think, to be open to change, at least, or to be like, or even just want to make their own mark on the world.
I think that's true, with this wanting you to make your own mark and wanting to, to have the opportunity to have a good life, right?
Yeah.
I think that's very important. I'm not so sure with this, anti-tradition. I mean, I of course, you're right that, as a young person, you're just not as set in your ways. I liked how you put that. But I also see many young people, especially in this country, and I mean, probably because I know this country best, this and Germany. But I see young people here in the United States who are very traditional and kind of, and I wonder, so it's just they are more invisible, they are not being talked about all the time. They don't, put themselves out there in front of the TVs and everything. But they're certainly there.
But to me, what I would argue there is, I think that's a pushback against this increasing, like, secular norm, this increasing, like, where, this, I know this word has so many connotations, but I can't think of a better word right now, this kind of more woke norm, where progressivism, or what we associate with that, is the norm right now. So then their way of rebelling against tradition, would be embracing embracing tradition.
Kind of like their rebellious phase is by saying, no, actually, I wanna, return to the more stereotypical old gender roles, for example. Yeah.
I did want to talk specifically about, I know we touched on this, but why might Trump appeal to young men? And I think I have a very passionate position on that.
Yeah, let's hear it. I think, I know you told me a lot about this, so I think that those are really interesting things.
To me, I find it incredibly frustrating the way a lot of the more progressive movement has been treating men as a whole. And I know the very typical reaction from this is being like, oh, you're being such a pick-me, you know, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's actually a point to that. Like, I know men have historically benefited from patriarchal systems, but also these 20-year-olds, they're not the founding fathers, right? It's not
Absolutely.
as if, yeah. I really dislike this idea of collective guilt, like if you were born...
Or, inherited
guilt,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Where I'm like, just because you benefit from a system doesn't make you a bad person. I don't believe that. I do think it means that you can that you have a certain responsibility to examine your role in the system, but even to that extent, I think young men in America right now, or young people in America in general, I find this focus on, okay, this is a bit of a jump, but I promise it'll all make sense, this intense focus on identity politics over class politics, I think is a real mistake, and I think we see this because we're losing a lot of the support of people who we need, right? I think what would actually be helping people is a focus on, the working class and disadvantaged people class-wise, which is also has a huge overlap with marginalized people.
Right.
But you also then don't alienate the people who...
And it's not just alienating, it's excluding.
Yeah.
Because there are poor people, in every identity group, and I agree with you that the focus on identity as kind of the main component of how people think or should think of themselves, I find that really counterproductive, and I've been worried about it for a while, and I don't think it has served us well as society. So I agree very much with that. And I think
not only has it not served us well, it hasn't served the people well who are supposed to benefit from that, I think. Or not as much as it could.
Yeah, I think that's... I'm not sure. I do think that it's important, especially for marginalized groups, because I think it kind of brought them more into the limelight, right? So that is a good thing, I guess. The problem is that with identity politics is, and I've had that sometimes now in history classes when people have discussions, and there's an African American and maybe an Asian American and someone from with Middle Eastern background, and then I with my German background, and people who have long history, their families here in the United States, and occasionally you hear these points that you can't really imagine what it's like, as a woman or as a black person or as a you name it. And as a historian, I always cringe when somebody says that, because think about it, history is a discipline that kind of lives off the idea that we can imagine what it's like, because nobody of us lived 250 years ago, and I do think, even though there is also of course a kernel of truth, nobody can ever imagine what it's like to be someone else, right, and to be a member of another group or whatever, but I think it's so important to try and to also acknowledge, yes, to a certain extent we can, because, there's something that combines us all. We are all humans.
And also, I think it's so important to encourage not only the use, but the practice of empathy. Like,
exactly. It's all about empathy.
I think if you just tell someone, you have no idea, you can never imagine it, that discourages someone from really trying to put themselves in somebody else's shoes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to go back now to the topic that you raised with young men, I think, because I thought about this also a lot, why are they so drawn to Trump? That's just remarkable that that gender gap
Yeah.
that is historically also really interesting and significant. I mean, on the one hand, there was always the case that men tended to vote more conservatively than women here in the United States over the last few decades, I believe. But there is something, that's just a dramatic gap. And I think there is a crisis of young male identity, if you want to call it that. And right now, the answers or the kind of the offerings that are coming their way are mostly from the political right. And I see very little done from the political left. I mean, not to say, I don't want to, vilify the political left.
We love the political.
Yes,
sometimes.
I mean, it's not to say that they don't do anything, but there is something. I think they just don't feel seen at all.
Yeah.
A big majority of them, and that's a problem. And then someone like Jordan Peterson comes, or Joe Rogan, or you know these people better than I, because I have never really. I will listen to more podcasts now, but I'm still learning a lot about these people. And
I mean, that's also, it's a major, like, I think specifically the new right that you focus on, I mean, they're very aware of this issue, I think.
Yeah.
Because they have tapped into whatever you can think of, these typical male hobbies, like video games, like historical stuff, like the ancient Greeks or Romans or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there's also role-playing groups and fans of certain fantasy worlds, like Game of Thrones and things like that.
It's just...
Big Game of Thrones fan.
Well, if you really were, you'd know that it's plural thrones.
This is what happens to me on a daily basis.
No, but I think just you're right. I think that's where I think there's this feeling of identity politics where you have to be strategic about it. Like, yes, men have, especially white men, have historically been more advantaged. That doesn't mean you can just be like, okay, we don't need your vote, or I'm going to try to get your vote by saying you need to examine your privilege and support the women.
Okay, make up. You are the one now who has to kind of suffer a little bit to bring equality back, because 50 years ago people who looked like you had it so much better, which is totally true. But
it's not. You're not
not necessarily helpful when you want to win somebody's vote.
Especially because you see that so many more educated people vote Democrat. Yeah. I think there's a lot of this, there's such a distance from these people where it's very easy to sit there and be like, marginalized people didn't have that many opportunities back then, so now we're going to give them more, and then white people and men will have to sit back for a while. And like, technically you can sit there and be like, yeah, that makes sense, that works out, that's like, that we need to do something like that. It's another thing to sit face to face with someone who's making like $50,000 a year and tell them because that you're the privileged one.
And by the way, $50,000 is not much, but it's already more than most people, especially younger people, make when they start with a job, if they don't have any college degree or anything like that. So no, I think that's a really important point that needs to be stressed in this conversation. And like you said, also, when you enter politics, you have to think strategically. You can't just come with, a purity to it that, everyone has to kind of, it has to be like you want them to be. That's just not how politics work. You have to appeal to people that you personally might not even like all that much. I think also when you, for example, look at numbers here, I think that by now, young women are more likely, are the majority when it comes to earning a college degree, and they're getting better grades. So they are being more successful. And that is great. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. Yeah. But you can also see how that opens another huge door for people.
Resentment.
And also for people now from the political parties and the elites who saying, you know what, these people are kind of angry because all these young women are stealing, in their eyes, their jobs, and they're making it more difficult for them to achieve. And I think that is something, we should aim for all young people to get a good education and not celebrate that one gender goes way ahead and the other one is left behind. I don't think. Again, I get it. I get the emotion. I get because of literally centuries, millennia of female oppression, and female oppression that is still going on, especially in some corners of the world. But we have to be strategic, like you said.
I guess when it comes to progress and making progress, punishment cannot be part of the agenda. That cannot be what you're focusing on as part of how we make the world a better place. Because if you really care about the issues you say you care about, then your main goal has to be creating more opportunities for the people who have been historically disadvantaged, not punish those who have historically not been in positions of power. I find this, there's so much.
Also, we should say though that it's not coming from a need to or plan to punish people. I don't think that's correct, Anna. I think that it just happens when you kind of try to lift up marginalized groups, that other groups then kind of fall behind a little bit, and that's also just a kind of I would call it an unintended side effect. But it's important to deal with that unintended side effect and to notice it and to not just say, then you kind of deserve it because 100 years ago you had it really good. But and you looked like you.
I guess that's where my chronically online part comes in. Because whenever I see anyone talk about male issues from the left, where they're like it's not like one of those right wing the incels must rise up. It's from the left. We need to appeal to men. We need to find a way. There are just so many comments of people just absolutely going after them. There's this male loneliness epidemic, and it's overwhelming how much of the online left reacts to that with this glee. There's no sympathy at all to me. And I know that the internet sort of brings that out in people, but I think the problem is, you can't discount the internet even if it shows this more extreme side, because these angry young men, where they are. They're online. They're getting angrier and angrier and more
That's
radicalized.
A really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah.
So, they don't see these establishment Democrats who are this is an unintended side effect. They see these political influencers who spout this very intense rhetoric.
Yes. It was a huge mistake not to focus more on social media and these kind of new mediums to appeal to young
I will
voters.
forever be angry at Kamala Harris for not going on Joe Rogan. I mean, that was such a mistake, because as far as I remember, he did say that he would have had her on.
I read that the main reason why she didn't go on was that they couldn't agree on kind of conditions under which the interview should be held, which already sounds bad, right? I mean, how terrible could the conditions have been? That already makes me think of, did they insist that only certain questions could be asked, or what so I would, it sounds not good, so, anyway.
So my general impression has been that the populist rhetoric that Trump uses is very appealing to young people, especially young men. A, is that something that seems true to you? And B, do you think that the Democrats should lean into that in order to or not?
Do you think the Democrats should start talking like Trump?
Not like Trump. Not all populists are Trump. Populism is not an evil word,
Well, I
Bernie
don't
Sanders
know.
is a populist.
Yeah, and I don't like that either. So
I like Bernie Sanders. I'm a big Bernie bro.
Should we all become populists now? I guess that would be the question.
Well, you know what? That can be the next, not the next topic. That'll be a topic.
Can I actually? I think we covered these important points, like it was about the economy much more, and then we talked about abortion. We talked about Trump's appeal to young male crisis of masculinity or and many other things. But I do think that there is something else that also is important when you look at the results of the young vote in this election. One, youth voter turnout was significantly lower than it was in 2020. And I think, and again, I'm speculating, so I have no exit polls to back that up. So this is just me using my intuition, so I might be wrong. So I would be curious what other people think about that. But I do think that there is a strong possibility that many young people stayed home because of the wars in Ukraine, and in particular the war in Gaza. And I wonder if some people were just kind of so overwhelmed by that choice that they brought themselves to think, okay, I can't vote for Trump, but I can't vote for the Democratic Party either. And then they just decided to sit that one out. And then, of course, add to that the young people who, as we know from Michigan in particular, with Dearborn, where you have a hugely Arab American majority in that district or region. I think many of them voted for Trump for a similar reason, that
or
they
Jill Stein.
Or Jill Stein, exactly. I just think that's an aspect to consider that has probably nothing to do with them being young.
No.
But it just shows that young people are also like other people, and that they also vote sometimes based on new issues that came up. What do you think?
I think I do disagree with you on that.
Go ahead.
Because I've been following this somewhat with the young people who decided, from the left, who decided not to vote or to vote for Jill Stein. I think it certainly made a difference in Trump winning Michigan. I don't think it made a difference in Trump winning the election, just because there hasn't, from what I've seen, been enough to support that idea that there are that many people in the uncommitted movement or who sat out because of that reason in particular. Like I said, Michigan is another story, but I shy away from blaming the leftists for this particular loss. I do blame them for...
and just to be clear, I'm not blaming them.
Okay, no,
I think it might be another factor that needs to be considered.
No, but what I'm saying, I get where you're coming from. I find it really short-sighted not to vote because of, for example, Gaza.
Why do you think that so many people said out?
Especially because, but just let me finish. I find it really short-sighted not to vote for because of what's happening in Gaza, especially because there are a lot of Palestinians who are like, no, I mean, the worst thing that could happen is that Trump becomes president. I'm not saying Kamala Harris is going to do much more to help the Palestinians, but I think Trump, we know his history with supporting someone like Netanyahu. So, like I said, that's why I'm angry at the leftists. I'm not angry at them for costing us the election. I think that's more the mainstream Democrats needing to look at themselves and rethink how they're appealing to young people. And to
all people.
All people. I guess when I look at that, it's a factor, but everything is a factor. I don't think foreign policy was a...
I mean, people always say, and that's true, that, foreign policy is often the least thing on people's minds when it comes to these elections. But we also have entered a period in history where foreign policy begins to matter or be much more present.
Right.
In the sense that it has direct domestic impact. Like when you look at the energy crisis that happened immediately as a result of the war in Ukraine, right?
But that affected Europe.
That affected Europe, absolutely. But people are also watching, and it kind of brings home that point, when there's a war going on somewhere, when something really bad and dramatic is happening, it might actually also affect us. So it's just a thought, but I also I don't want to say this was the major factor. I just think it's probably something that should be added.
And
to the
it's
mix.
certainly something the mainstream Democrats could have done more to address, and the leftists could have been a bit more intelligent about.
Yeah. I mean, that was another. Trump went to Dearborn. Kamala Harris didn't.
Yeah. Bizarre. Just bizarre choice on her part. On her team's part, I'm not. Okay, now, to sort of wrap up, would Gen Z have voted for Hitler?
Do I have to go first?
I can go first. I have my answer.
No, I go first because you are the head
I
of
need
this
to do the
podcast.
closing word.
So, would Gen Z have voted for Hitler? Well, my answer is this. When you ask the question, would young people or did young people vote for Hitler? Yes, of course they did. Now, did they vote for Hitler in a majority? No. Meaning, way beyond 50% or something like that. Unfortunately, we don't know. I mean, we know a lot about the people who voted for Hitler, but we don't know that according to age groups.
Oh.
So we don't have really good data on that. But so what I would say, what we saw in Nazi Germany or at the dawn of Nazi Germany was that people voted for the Nazis from all ranks and parts of society, and that included young people. We also saw, and that is something that can be shown because it's very easy to show. You will understand what I mean. That young people were disproportionately members of the Nazi Party. So there was a lot of young people that were active in the Nazi Party. And that included, as people know, some of their leading figures.
Do you mean like the Hitler Jugend, or do you mean...
No. I mean young people.
Like 18 to 29?
Yes. Who were in high-ranking positions.
Yeah.
That is something that Nazi Germany is known for, that, and rightfully so, that people moved into very powerful positions then in the 1930s, even though they were still quite young. Now, with Gen Z, if you meant the question like, would Gen Z really vote for someone like Hitler today? I think that's probably not how you meant it, though, right? I mean, I think... You
can answer it seriously, how you think I meant it, whatever.
Yeah, okay. Well, and I would just say, I don't think so, because, we all have the advantage of having grown up in a world post-Hitler, and that means that we kind of have that one single thing that most people, big majority, still agree, okay, that was really bad. Here he is back, back from the dead. I think he would not get elected in the United States, not even by Gen Z.
Not even by Gen Z.
Would they vote for someone, who has authoritarian leanings and likes to flirt with fascist ideas? I think we saw the answer.
So you do think Trump is a fascist?
No. I said fascist. What did I say? Fascist leanings, authoritarian leanings, and
flirts with
fascism. Yes, and I would leave it at that. Actually,
right. Would Gen Z have voted for Hitler? I have this mantra, or I don't know what the word mantra means, so maybe it's not a mantra. But I have what I think is a mantra, and that is that people don't change, circumstances do. I think there's always going to be a certain percentage of people within a population or within a demographic who are susceptible to fascism, populism, alt-right-wing ideas, whatever you want to name it, or even like left-wing stuff, Marxist ideas. Like, there's always going to be people who are susceptible to these certain things. But what changes is not the people themselves or what they're open to or what they're not open to, but rather the circumstances. Like, in a time where, like, to take Hitler and the Nazis as an example, the circumstances made a big difference, whether, the economic crises, the post-World War I stuff with the Treaty of Versailles, all of that, I think took those, the kind of set percentage of people who are susceptible to fascist rhetoric and kind of not only increased that, but empowered those people to a certain extent. And I think like you said, nowadays, like, an actual Hitler figure really wouldn't be able to do much. But I think the alt-right is adapting, or the new right is adapting in very interesting ways. That's something we can talk about in the future. They're embracing certain things that appeal to young people, especially in a world where things like climate change and this increasing focus on identity politics, where this is all like these new circumstances. I think that the people who are maybe the equivalent of Hitler nowadays, I think they're very good at adapting, or in Trump's case, they're very good at just doing whatever comes to mind, and that happens to be the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that still appeals to everyone in a certain way, and if the circumstances continue to go the way they're going, which is to say worsen and put more people in places of crises and like where they're worried about their future and their children's future, I do think Gen Z could vote for not maybe Hitler, but certainly for fascism.
You know, it's interesting because it reminds me of this one observation that I made over the last 2 decades. You know, I've been teaching this Nazi Germany course on a very regular basis, and like, you know, almost for 20 years now, here in the United States. And I always show a speech by Hitler at one point during the class. And I asked them, what do you make of, you know, his rhetorical style? And then I also ask, do you think that would still be efficient today? How would, you know, an American public react to that? And I swear to you that, you know, for a very long time, I would get these answers, no, that's just ridiculous, you know, because it's kind of, it looks silly and it's completely overdone. And in the last few years, that has changed. Not in the fact that they say, oh, this is just, you know, what a wonderful person. Of course not. But in this, I think, you know, I think that would still work. And I think that's a reflection already of how the American political rhetoric and process has changed. It has become much more, because this generation, you know, they grew up in the Trump era, in this
Trump era, baby.
This new rhetoric where it's just not that unusual that you tear down your political opponents in this, you know, really intense, hateful way. And I just find that interesting. That kind of speaks to your point with when circumstances change. I would disagree, though, in terms of that everyone would find that appealing at one
I didn't
point.
say that.
Did you
I
not?
said there was
Okay.
a certain percentage of people who are susceptible to
Right.
Maybe
and I completely agree. I completely agree with that. I thought later you said that at
I
one
might
point,
have,
you know.
but I didn't mean it.
I still hold on to that hope that some people are immune and always will be. But
to fascism.
yeah, or to any other horrific school of thought.
She means the communists.
What is that? What's the English word for that?
Sabotage.
When you destroy someone's reputation.
Oh, slander.
Slander. Yeah, that's slander. Okay. To not. I'm happy to talk about communism.
Yes.
In a dignified manner. So don't.
Okay. 2 last things. Do we think that this is a trend that's going to continue in the future? Like, this young people tending to vote more towards the right, or increasingly, because increasingly the percentage increasingly the percentage it's just great rhetoric here. And then if the answer is yes or no or whatever, just explain how would you fix this, or more broadly, fix America?
Okay, I don't think it's a trend yet. I don't see that. For young people, I think it very much depends on how the other party in this 2-party system will appeal to young voters the next time. You know, I think you can quickly make changes here that could fix this. I also think, you know, to follow up on your point about circumstances, will very much depend on that. I mean, if the second Trump presidency turns out to be this time where, I don't know, college tuition will be cancelled and everyone will get a better shot, and young people will have better schools and better jobs, then yes, then maybe that will become a trend. But I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that will happen. And how can we fix it? Like I said, I don't think that's such a difficult fix. I think you need to to listen to young people, you need to engage with them. You can't be condescending to anyone, including young people, and that means, you know, getting used to the forms of communication that they have and all the other things that we talked about.
Yeah.
You completely agree with me, don't you?
No. Well,
it was
kind
worth
of.
a try.
Okay, my predictions for the future. I've had this new thing after the 2024 election that I'm only following Murphy's Law. So basically, whatever is the worst case scenario, that's what I assume is going to happen. So I assume that the young voters will all go for Trump and we'll end up in a dictatorship in like 5 years. But on a more serious note, how would I fix this? How would I fix America? On the one hand, I do think that politicians, especially the mainstream Democrats, need to reach out more to young people on their platforms. I think they need to embrace a lot of the new medias the way that Trump and the right have embraced the new medias. Like, just as a quick example, if you look at where people watched election night, like the top 3 podcasts, or the top 3 Twitch streamers or something like that, more people were watching them than any of the major news networks.
Ah, that's interesting.
And all of them skewed conservative, and the conservatives also put a lot of money into these pundits on Twitch or whatever they're on. The Democrats
more
do not do
left-wing Twitchers.
We do Twitch streamers.
Twitch streamers.
Twitchers. So I think the Democrats need to invest a lot of money into these programs.
Sponsors?
Yeah,
please contact us.
And also, I think, while I do think you need to lean into the medium, I think almost this, like, creating memes is kind of condescending in its own way. Like, that you think young people can only be reached by that. I think young people, especially young people who are in a voting age, they very much care about the issues. They don't want to hear Kamala Harris talk about how horrible Trump is. They want her to talk about what she's going to do to make their lives better. So yeah, I think the mainstream Dems, they need to reach out more to young people, but in a way where you're also showing, like, yeah, I take you seriously. I don't take your vote for granted. And
if young people are anything like me at all, then the Democrats should seriously consider getting rid of the part of the stump speech that goes like this: I was, and this happened in my life, and then I made it. Nobody wants to hear that 100 times plus. And what's more, you really don't want to hear it when you have not made it. Okay? You don't want to hear someone who rose all the way up. That is appealing when anyone else feels pretty good about themselves too. It's not so appealing when you're going through inflation and stuff like that.
Yeah, so my advice would just be, I actually have one great last piece of advice. You want to appeal to young people? Get the 80+ people out of the out of the Congress, out of the House. Yes, yeah, whatever. And you know how old the founding fathers were? They were in their, like, 20s. And now, like, the majority of people are, retirement age.
Right, and you don't forget, to the 80-year-olds among our viewers, you can always take your grandchild and do a podcast, you know? This does not have to be the end of your political career.
Or, you know what? Right? Yeah. But also, like, I don't know when
fix America.
You could fix America. Nice. So she wants me to stop now. Thank you for listening. So our next episode is going to be about, actually, what we were just talking about, Democrats and their online presence. It's going to be called Is Kamala Actually Brat? If you know, you know. And it will be available in, hopefully, 2 weeks. Same time, same place. Bye.
Bye.
Oh God, my foot fell asleep.